This is Space Minds by Space News. In this week's episode of Space Minds, Space News China correspondent Andrew Jones joins host Mike Gruss to unpack China's year-end sprint in space, expected tests tied to Long March 10, and a new crew spacecraft, up to 8 maiden commercial launches from firms like Landspace and Space Pioneer, alongside CASC Long March 12A, and the state-backed funding push behind national mega constellations.
Hi, everyone. I'm joined today by Andrew Jones, Space News' China correspondent. Andrew, I want to have you on today because you write a newsletter for us every 2 weeks about China's space industry and their space activities. And in the latest issue, you wrote about China's big push between now and the end of the year. And there's a lot going on, particularly with the launch industry. So why don't we start there? Talk to us about what should people be looking for between now and the end of 2025, which sounds like it's going to be a real rush.
Well, the first thing to be looking for is the China report, which comes out every 2 weeks. So where we summarize our reporting from the Chinese space sector. So yeah, but yeah, the idea was basically to take a look at what was going on in China before the end of the year and give readers an idea of what might be coming down the pipeline. So two kind of different strands here. So one would be the China's crewed lunar program. So we could be seeing some new tests for that. So I mean, this year we've already seen a static flight for a shortened version of the Long March 10 first stage. So we might be seeing a low altitude test or a full-sized first stage static flight, something like this. That could be one thing. And then also the Mengzhou crewed spacecraft, which will be able to take astronauts to the moon. They've already done a pad abort test. So the next thing that we're expecting for this is a abort test at Max Q. So we're not sure if this will happen at Zhoushan in northwest China or at Hainan in South China on the coastal spaceport. So those are things to look out for, and it'll be more evidence of China's progress in on the hardware it needs to get its astronauts to the moon and back. The other thing is that we've got a number of launches which are getting very close to the pad and having their first orbital launch tests. So I think there was about up to about 8 rockets variously developed by commercial space companies, and also one by CASC, the state-owned main space contractor. So that would be the Long March 12A. So we might be seeing that. That could include a launch and landing test on this orbital first launch, and then you have companies including Space Pioneer, Landspace, iSpace, Orion Space, Deep Blue Nebula, Galactic Energy. So there's a whole plethora of companies in China developing their rockets. So these companies are developing medium lift rockets, which some might be potentially reusable from the beginning, some which will take more development down the line. So first they'll be expendable. Their goal is mainly to be able to prove reliability. So first get to orbit, of course, then to prove that they can do this, and then compete for contracts for China's mega constellations, and that would be the kind of contracts which could provide a future for them to build on. So those are the big things going on. I think we'll see, because these are first time launches, and for some of these companies it's the first time they'll be launching liquid propellant rockets. It will be very interesting. So there might be some spectacular successes and some spectacular failures, and it should be very interesting to follow in the next few months. So the understanding at the moment is that Zhoushan, the national spaceport, is kind of off limits to commercial activities during October, which hints at some major national projects going on there. So one thing that will be happening is the launch of the Shenzhou 21 mission. So, they're sending 3 astronauts to the Tiangong space station for the next 6-month rotation. So I guess that they don't want any kind of commercial mishaps affecting planning for that. And also there might be some activity related to the lunar project, which we, discussed earlier.
Why is all this happening kind of right now? I mean, 8, or even a half dozen maiden launches all at once seems like just a really big number to happen all in such a short period of time. What happened years ago that has led to this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we'd have to go back to late 2014 when the central government kind of looking at what was going on in America with SpaceX, and with Planet and things like this, are seeing commercialization, innovation, cutting of costs and everything. And they realized that, okay, we can't just rely on, state-owned Long March rockets, which are expendable and hypergolic. We'll have to try and catch up to some degree. So back in late 2014, they opened up the sector in small ways to private capital, essentially. So then you had a handful of companies which began to spring up. So Landspace was one of them. LinkSpace was one, which is now pretty much defunct. And their plan was to make light lift rockets. LinkSpace was looking to go the reusable route straight away, but many of the companies that emerged were just looking to deal in solid rockets at first and then move on to liquid propellant rockets, which would be more complex and more challenging. So at the beginning, I mean, there was no real sense of what the plan would be for these. So you would be looking at maybe launching CubeSats for universities, that kind of thing. There was no real clear market. So what's happened over the years is the openness, the possibilities have been expanded in terms of the policy guidelines and so on. So more things have become possible. There's been more money being pumped in, and the plans for these rocket companies have kind of grown in ambition. So you're moving to much bigger launch vehicles. So if you look at some of if we look at a couple of these new launches which will be coming online. If you look at Galactic Energy and Deep Blue Aerospace, these are rockets which they planned or started developing back, say, 2018. So these are quite small rockets. You're talking 1 or 2 tons, maybe to low Earth orbit, maybe a bit bigger for Galactic Energy's Pallas 1. But these are already too small, because what they need to do is be able to develop a launcher which can carry, say, around 18 satellites into orbit for a constellation launch. For example, the Guang or the Changfan mega constellations. So these companies they're looking to get these rockets on the pad, but then they're already planning much bigger versions of these rockets to launch maybe as soon as next year after these debut launches. So the Nebula 1 will become the Nebula 2, Pallas 1 will become Pallas 2, and these will be bigger. And the other companies which were noted, I mean, they've already moved on to much larger launch vehicles. So in the case of Landspace, which is quite notable, they've moved to stainless steel, and it will be reusable. And I think the payload capability is something with around about 17 to 22 tons to low Earth orbit. So that's, kind of Falcon 9 class kind of territory, and, that would be very capable. So you've gradually seen over the last decade, the ambitions have been ramping up, and the amount of money and state backing and policy support has been growing alongside. So it's been very interesting to watch, and now we're seeing kind of the culmination of these efforts on the from the state side, on the policy side, and now in the commercial sector with their efforts on the technology side.
Sure. And you mentioned a couple times some of the money that's come into, particularly the launch market. There was a big announcement last week, but it feels like almost every couple of weeks we're hearing from you about a new Series B, a new Series C. There's a lot of money coming into China's space programs right now. So talk to me about what's happened recently, and particularly this latest announcement.
So the background would be, in the last couple of years, China's state government has decided that commercial space is of strategic importance and needs to be backed. So following that decision, you've had local and provincial governments working to implement this kind of desire, in a sense, and looking to support and attract these companies so that they can foster growth in their own areas. And what that means is what we're seeing is increasingly large funding rounds. So we've had over the last like 5 years or so, we've had some fairly large rounds supporting some companies, tens of millions and so on, maybe even a bit larger. But now we're looking at 300 million plus in two cases, which were for the launch companies Space Pioneer and Landspace. So what you're seeing is, Beijing recognizing that having a mega constellation or two is of high strategic value, and to get these constructed in orbit, China needs a big increase in its access to space. So it's been working on expanding its spaceport infrastructure and also making sure that these launch companies are getting the money that they need to develop launches, which can hopefully, from their perspective, launch reliably and often and help build these constellations.
Yeah. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about a story that I think was mentioned in the newsletter in the last couple of weeks. But there was this kind of almost cat and mouse game, anything you can do, I can do better type of game that happened between a Maxar satellite and a Chinese satellite. So tell us a little bit about that story and what happened there.
Yeah, that's a fascinating development in the in the kind of this geopolitical kind of context that we have with China and the US. So I think earlier back in the summer, there was a post on LinkedIn of all places from a Maxar employee, and what was called Maxar, I should say, and so what they'd done is they'd used one of their satellites to take like a non-Earth imagery picture of I think it was Shijian 26, which is part of an experimental series in which China will launch a satellite and then look at best practices for using this new technology in orbit. So this satellite was said to be for remote sensing, Earth observation, testing, part of its new generation remote sensing satellites. So to get like a close-up image of this, I think within I think it was within 50 kilometers or so, very high detailed imagery. This is quite exceptional, and the fact that it was part of what is kind of one of China's classified or very opaque satellite series, that was certainly notable. So what we saw then in the last month or so was Chang Satellite Technology, which is a kind of quasi-state-owned commercial company which operates its own Earth observation fleet. So they got in on the Non-Earth Imagery Act and took an opportunity to image one of Maxar's own satellites and kind of repay the favor. So right. These worldview satellites aren't classified, so it's not exactly tit for tat, but it's certainly interesting. We're certainly saying, hey, look, we can do this too. So yeah, I mean that adds to things that we see going on in geostationary orbit, where you have this cat and mouse between different inspector satellites and so on. So yeah, it's fascinating to see this, and yeah.
Just the granularity of the photo too from both of them. It was stunning, seems a little bit strong, but it was certainly surprising to see. And I think this is a whole area that maybe hasn't gotten as much attention, that, as you call it, the non-Earth imaging, this, hey, what do satellites look like while they're on orbit? And it's fascinating. And I think just the public nature and the sharing of it is what made it particularly interesting, and saying like, hey, we have this capability and we know you have this capability. So a lot of fun, a fun story to watch, and we'll see how that plays out over the next couple of years, obviously. I wanted to ask one more question before we go, which is, I think careful readers probably realize that the date line you file from, you file from Finland. You don't often file from China, obviously. But talk to me about how you report from where you live, and how, like, the process of doing that, because I think there's so many questions about transparency right now, and how space programs around the world operate, how they work, how they're spending money. And I think just your systems and your methods are really interesting. So talk to me a little bit about how you find stories, and how you know something is true, or how you glean that perspective to make a story really sing, that might not come from a state account or a state news agency.
Yeah, that's a good question. I often get this question. How do you do what you do? I maybe don't have the most coherent answer. It's just kind of like I just do it in a sense. But I mean, a lot of it is just daily tracking of what's going on with Chinese state media, companies like CASC, or in the commercial sector, looking at what insiders or enthusiasts would say on Chinese social media, and then trying to cross-reference and verify things, using satellite imagery to see if a test which they claim is likely to happen soon, if that can be backed up. Things like this. A lot of it is sometimes, like, because it is China's activities sometimes aren't that transparent. A lot of it is maybe just providing the context of what's going on. So, for example, we're talking about the funding rounds. So you might just see, okay, well, that's a lot of money, but then I think it's important to then provide the reader with the context. Okay, why this is happening, why this is actually important, and So I think sometimes it's just having followed everything that's going on, and then being able to provide the context for the reader. That's important. I would say China's space sector has grown so much in the last 10 years that in some ways they have become more transparent in some ways. So I think, for example, if you're looking at this crewed lunar program, they are taking opportunities at times to give some kind of updates. So, for example, when the Shenzhou 21 crewed mission happens, there'll be a press conference the day before, or maybe the day after as well, in which you might get some officials from China's Human Spaceflight Agency, and they'll give some insight. So the thing is that this is not really fully transparent in any sense. This is just them being, on transmit. So they're just telling you what they want to tell us. And a lot of the questions which are, put to them in these press conferences are agreed beforehand. So the first one would be a very soft thing about, oh, can you tell us about improvements in the new in the Long March rocket, which they've been using for 15 years already. And it'll be soft stuff like this, but you'll get some interesting insights. So yeah, I think one interesting thing is that there's been an expansion of the spaceports that they use. So at Hainan, which is on the coast of South China, and there's also the Eastern Maritime Spaceport in Shandong province. So these are a lot more difficult to kind of keep quiet in terms of what's going on there. So you have enthusiasts there who will go and take pictures with very long lenses and say, hey, look, this rocket stage is being put up here for a static fire test. So we get some more insights than we would otherwise. But on the other hand, it's much harder to use Chinese social media. I mean, you have to have a Chinese phone number and give your details and all this kind of thing. Whereas before you could search from the outside with no problem. And also organized forums which I had where enthusiasts would, discuss certain developments and list planned launches, all these kinds of things. Those things got taken down. So it's kind of evolving in a way. The kind of information environment surrounding China's space program. So I mean, the thing is that there's so much more to cover these days, so many more things happening, so many different more realms. So it's a lot to keep up with, or to attempt to keep up with, but it's all very fascinating, and it's a very interesting time.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much. Thank you for what you do. I know our readers enjoy it. For our listeners, if you would like to subscribe to Andrew's China Report, you can do that at spacenews.com. Thanks so much for watching. This has been Space Minds. Thanks for joining us.